I think from the U.S. government side, we're very pleased that we've been able to reach this point in the negotiations with the Sierra Leonean government. We've believed for a long time that the MCC would benefit immensely the people of Sierra Leone and set forth the transformation of the energy sector, making it truly accessible to all Sierra Leoneans and setting the stage for greater private sector growth. So the fact that we've reached the point where the compact has been signed and where we can now begin working on implementation for the U.S. government is a very positive development. Designed to look at countries objectively, compare them with other developing countries, and offer assistance to those which are moving forward on a range of very specific indicators. So the indicators that we look at are really investing in people, ruling justly, and controlling corruption. So every year the MCC does an evaluation of all potentially eligible developing countries and determines how they are ranking on those criteria. And if a country scores highly enough on the MCC scorecard, the board then considers whether or not to offer a compact to that country. They take into account the scorecard as well as other indicators of whether a country is moving in the direction that would allow an MCC investment in development to have a meaningful impact. In Sierra Leone's case, Sierra Leone did not originally pass the MCC scorecard. So what the board decided to do was to initiate the threshold program that you mentioned, which was designed to help Sierra Leone improve on the various indicators that MCC looks at. And thanks to the, I think, leadership of successive governments, the involvement of the opposition, the involvement of civil society, we've been able to see Sierra Leone's scorecard continue to improve over time, ultimately to reach a point where they passed it for multiple years. And that's why the MCC board elected ultimately to offer a compact to Sierra Leone.
All right, now
So the Millennium Challenge Corporation worked very closely with the Compact Development Unit in the Office of the Vice President here in Sierra Leone. They looked at a number of different studies to determine what area would have the greatest impact in reducing poverty and stimulating economic growth, which are the two primary goals of the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And at the end of the day, they discussed various options with the Compact Development Unit and the Office of the Vice President, and it was ultimately the Cabinet of Sierra Leone that made the determination that based upon the studies that were available, investing in the energy sector, investing all of the money in the energy sector made the most sense. And that was something that, based upon the data, the Millennium Challenge Corporation was able to support.
all right, so
Much so, if we had disagreed on the compact, we would still be in negotiations with the government over exactly what was in there. The fact that we were able to conclude negotiations in July indicates that both the Millennium Challenge Corporation and the government were in agreement as to what projects should be pursued.
The threshold was on energy or
Progress, and you can see in the indicators that they made progress, but it did not go far enough. And it was never intended to address all of the problems of the energy sector. It was intended to make sustained improvements so that the government could show that it was meeting the investing in people indicators. Where we are currently is that there are a number of reform elements that the government will need to address prior to the construction phase of the MCC beginning. They have agreed to those. They are enumerated in the compact. They can be read online by anyone who is interested. But there are a series of outstanding reforms that will still need to be undertaken.
the grantees.
When it offered the compact to the government, gave them the upper limit of what the U.S. government funding for the compact could be. The government then decided it was going to add a very small amount of Sierra Leonean government resources to the compact and have that administered as part of it, and that's how we arrive at the $480 million threshold.
Project will start off in
The next step is, of course, for the Parliament of Sierra Leone to ratify the the compact and adopt whatever legislation is necessary to set up what's called the Millennium Challenge Authority, which will be the local body that ultimately oversees the compact implementation, helping the government achieve some of the reforms that we've already talked about that it needs to do in the energy sector. It will allow us to begin some of the pre-feasibility work on the projects that needs to be done, environmental impact studies, engineering studies, design studies, and it will give the government time to meet the other requirements that it has to in order for the compact to come into effect. Once the government has met all of the preconditions, we will enter the compact into force, and that's when the bulk of the construction work will begin on the transmission and generation networks, and the bulk of the assistance will be provided on the long-term reforms of the power sector and encouragement for private sector investment.
All right, who will be in charge?
Retained by the U.S. government. The funds are not transferred to the Sierra Leonean government.
Why? Why not?
Challenge Corporation is set up globally. The way that the Millennium Challenge Corporation works is that the U.S. government retains the funding. We disperse that funding directly to the contractors that are carrying out the work on behalf of the Millennium Challenge Authority. Where the Sierra Leonean government becomes involved is through its membership in the MCA, which ultimately is the authority that directs compact implementation and will handle all of the contracting decisions that need to be made for implementation of the project. And that MCA is a collection of the U.S. government, the Sierra Leonean government, representatives from civil society, and representatives from the private sector.
All right.
Nothing to do with Sierra Leone. This is simply
globally.
Congress of the United States set up how the Millennium Challenge Corporation was to function, and they made the determination as to the rules under which it disperses its funds.
And you mentioned
Areas. There are what I will call the legal conditions, which involve the need for the government to have the agreement ratified by Parliament, certify that ratification, and the two sides to exchange various notes saying that they have completed their internal ratification of the agreement. The second part of it has to do with the specific prerequisites that are found in Article 7 of the Compact that deal with reform of the power sector. So there's a number of things that the government has agreed to do as preconditions to receiving the full MCC grant. All of those are specific, again, to the power sector management itself. The third area is a statutory requirement from our Congress that says that countries that are receiving MCC funding have to continue to meet the scorecard eligibility requirements throughout the life of the project. So at the time we determine when to bring this compact into force, we will need to see that Sierra Leone is still meeting those eligibility requirements. And for Sierra Leone specifically, the ruling justly indicator has been the one that has been most problematic in the recent past, and therefore in order for that indicator to continue to score where it needs to, we will need to see the full implementation of the Agreement for National Unity and the implementation of the recommendations from the Tripartite Committee's final report on election reforms. On an annual basis, we will continue to do that as we've done for the last several years. That data is gathered from a number of publicly available sources. It is collated, and then the scorecard presented on an annual basis to the government of Sierra Leone. So we will continue to undergo that process. We will also continue, as I said, to monitor very closely whether or not the government has implemented in full the Agreement for National Unity and the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee.
now.
Sierra Leone were to fall behind, we would look at various mechanisms depending on how severe the fall behind was that we could bring into place, and that could include everything up to and including the suspension of the compact itself. Responsible for handling the contracting relating towards implementation.
All right, but
We hope that many of the companies involved will be Sierra Leonean, but that will very much depend upon whether Sierra Leonean companies have the capacity to be able to carry out what is some very technical work in the energy sector. It's early days. We haven't gone through any rounds of bidding yet or put any contracts on the street. So I really can't say whether or not they'll be able to meet those pre-eligibility requirements. We just don't know. We'll have to see. We'll take the steps to hold accountable. Those who engaged either in fraud during the election or those who perpetrated violence against the Sierra Leonean people. It's the responsibility of the government to do that. As an international partner, we have consistently encouraged the government and the opposition to make sure that those steps are part and parcel of the recommendations coming out of the Tripartite Committee, and that the Attorney General's office and others are moving forward where appropriate with legal charges against individuals. Certainly the Tripartite Committee makes a number of recommendations that deal with accountability. It talks about the need for an external review of the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, as well as several other electoral management bodies. We look forward to seeing the results of those reviews when they are available, and for the government to take appropriate actions as detailed in those reports.
All right.
And for the MCC to enter into force, the government's really going to need to focus in two areas. One is on the reform of the power sector and making sure that it moves forward with all of the commitments that it's made in that sector. And then secondly, it's going to need to move forward expeditiously with implementing the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee and with ensuring that the outstanding elements of the Agreement for National Unity are fully implemented.
Now, let's look at the 80 recommendations.
To be very closely involved in supporting the government with the technical aspects of the implementation and supporting the opposition with the technical aspects of the implementation. As we did during the Tripartite Committee, USAID it will be providing support through our implementing partners to the steering committee and to other elements of the government that are carrying out the implementation of the Tripartite Committee recommendations. It's part and parcel of our democracy and governance program, and we consider this to be an incredibly important part of what we're trying to help the Sierra Leonean people achieve.
All right.
Not an easy process, nor did I expect it to be an easy process when you have two parties that had significant differences in their opinions on various matters that were before the committee. There were times when the opposition was unhappy with progress. There was times when the government was unhappy with progress. And both of them vociferously expressed their concern to the international community through the UN resident coordinator, who was our representative to the committee. On a few occasions, it boiled up into the public, and you saw the public commentary. But overall, I would say that the members of the committee did a very credible job in finding a way forward through some very, very difficult matters. The fact that they were ultimately able to agree on more than 80 joint recommendations is really a testament to the work that went into finding the sensible political compromises that were necessary to really focus on the electoral institutions. And I think that's the value of the Tripartite Committee report. Its process really forced both sides to set aside the politics of the moment and focus on the long term. Look at what's going to transform the election system to the benefit of the Sierra Leonean people. And at the end of the day, I think that's what we received from the committee.
Continue to
Evaluation program, that is the best way to get honest feedback and data about whether your project is successful or not.
Where is the external, for instance?
Well, I think monitoring and evaluation is absolutely a critical part of any development program. The way that figure is arrived at is based upon MCC's considerable experience doing this globally. It's well within the norms of what is spent on monitoring and evaluation for development programs. And without monitoring and evaluation, you have no way to ensure that the project is being carried out appropriately, that the benefits are being received, that the work is being done to an appropriate safety and health standard. So this is money that is absolutely critical, particularly as part of any large engineering project like this. Under the MCC Compact, the Millennium Challenge Authority, which is a combination of the government of the United States, the government of Sierra Leone, civil society, and the private sector, ultimately has the responsibility for procurement activities, including contracting for the MCC. We pegged the criteria to the tripartite recommendations are the serious act if it is not spent in an environment where there is peace, where there is stability, and where there is movement towards democracy. The 2023 elections, unfortunately, created an environment in which there was significant political disagreement in this country, and showed to the international development partners that there were serious structural issues with the electoral system in Sierra Leone. We could not, in good conscience, as the United States, expend $480 million of our taxpayers' money without seeing that those issues were being substantively and fundamentally addressed. The only way that that can happen is if we see the implementation of the Agreement for National Unity, including the recommendations of the Tripartite Committee.
The program, now Good Morning Saloon, they come to you from the Society for Radio Democracy 98.1 FM.
Electricity grid of Sierra Leone.
Right.
There's no question Sierra Leone has to sort through its power issues. We are very much committed to that. That's why, in addition to the Millennium Challenge Corporation grant, we have already used our Development Finance Corporation to move forward with the Nant Power Generation Project, the Western Area Power Generation Project here in Freetown. It's why we continue to work through Power Africa with the government to put in place other interim solutions to make sure that the power issues begin to be sorted through even before the MCC is fully implemented. In terms of what are the 80 recommendations, I hope that folks can read them online on the Ministry of Information and Civic Education's website. I know that they have put them out there. I will say, just in summary, the 80 recommendations all have to do with reforming the electoral system and making sure that the institutions that are in place function in a transparent manner in which everyone can have credibility on them. If the 80 recommendations are not implemented, what is the future of the MCC? Unfortunately, it's not good. We will not be able to enter into force if we don't see the sustained progress towards the implementation of those 80 recommendations. But again, both government and opposition have been very clear that they want to move these recommendations forward. These are Sierra Leonean recommendations, so I'm quite confident that they will, in fact, ultimately be implemented. Finally, on the question of visas, the United States has very strict conditions to obtain a non-immigrant visa to visit our country. Our Congress has said that every person who applies for a U.S. visa is considered to be intending to immigrate to the United States until they show us otherwise. So that is why conditions are very strict, why people have to demonstrate their intent to come back to Sierra Leone every time they apply for a visa. And because we have had numerous Sierra Leoneans who unfortunately have overstayed their visas in the United States or used their visas in ways that are not consistent with U.S. law, that makes it more difficult for everybody else to be able to prove that they're not immigrants.
Okay. More message.
Let me start with the last one. The government's behavior has no impact upon individual visa decisions. Visa decisions are made based upon an individual's eligibility. So if folks are not deemed eligible for visas, it has nothing to do with the government of Sierra Leone's policies. It has to do with your individual situation in the country. In terms of asking specifics on how the compact will affect Kailau, Kailau is part of the area that will benefit from new transmission and distribution lines through the compact. We should also see new generation capacity coming online that will help ensure that Kailau and the rest of Sierra Leone have much more reliable generation of power going into that. To the question on whether I've found the election data, look, I haven't seen any election data that the rest of the country hasn't seen. Unfortunately, the election data that has been presented does not fundamentally answer the questions that many Sierra Leoneans are asking about how the elections were conducted and what the results were. It is unfortunate that that data does not seem to exist, or has at least not been released and made public to the people of Sierra Leone, but we are where we are, and we need to focus on making sure that in the future that data is available to the Sierra Leonean people, and that's what the institutional reforms do. We've talked already about how the contractor disbursement works. Obviously some people are going to be thrilled by that, other people are not going to be happy by that, but that's simply how the MCC functions, and I will say the government has known this from day one of the negotiations, that that's how the MCC operates globally. And whether political actors will know how to behave at the next elections, I think that it is less about individual actors than it is about institutions. And we don't build laws, regulations, and institutions for angels in the political sphere. We build them to prevent those who want to do wrong from being able to do wrong. And that fundamentally is what the reform is about. It's making sure that irrespective of how political actors behave, they will not be able to manipulate the elections to their advantage.
Thank you.